Dr. Jim Lacatski, there has been considerable speculation, fueled in part by statements from the DOD's spokesperson, that the $22 million that was secured by Senator Reid and his colleagues in Congress to fund this program and study had nothing to do with UFOs. It was really just a study of future technologies, presumably by our adversaries, that it was really just that. Can you address whether OSAP was first and foremost an investigation of UFO phenomena? Why isn't it made obvious in any of the documentation that's been made public so far?
It was completely UFO related. The reason you haven't seen the documentation is we used a statement of objectives format for the request for proposal. That is insufficient for anyone examining the contents of the contract. They must have the proposal. Now, within the proposal, and in this case, it was from Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, it's clearly mentioned among the topics proposed, a worldwide database of advanced aerospace vehicles. There can be no ambiguity here. This was being proposed as a UFO project. Now, if you want to look at the tail end of the project, you'll find over 100 documents required to be reported to the Defense Intelligence Agency that were UFO related, in part, of course. I mean, they were large, very large documents. And you also have, technical studies, and you have that database, probably the largest UFO database that exists in the world and is currently being used by the US military. So yes, it was completely a UFO project.
One of the other things that's been confusing for the public over the last almost 4 years, the New York Times and other major media outlets reported that $22 million went to ATIP, not to OSAP. Can you clarify the difference between OSAP and ATIP?
Yes, the name ATIP was a nickname for OSAP for certain security reasons that we've put into the book. But the difference between OSAP with the nickname ATIP at DIA and ATIP at the Pentagon is quite distinct. OSAP had $22 million of funding. It covered military and civilian UFOs, yielding a massive database. It also had a main contract and subcontracts. Now, ATIP in the Pentagon, as described in the articles, was basically zero funded, looked at specific military UFO encounters, and very important ones because they had film, and it had no contract. So getting back to how did this mix-up occur, I think it's not deliberate. It's not due to authors, to television personalities, etc. It's the fact we were running not an official SAP, but a closed program. I can tell you for a fact that within my own office, they did not know, except leadership, that this contract was being run. They had no idea whatsoever. Our security was that tight. And also the fact is that, well, I guess that pretty much says it. That's the best example I can give.
Dr. Colm Kelleher, you were a program manager at BASS. Can you describe in sort of broad terms the operation at BASS? How many people were hired, in what time frame, and what did they do? I mean, was this a real investigation of UFOs and related phenomena, and how did it work?
Well, I was hired in November of 2008. The OSAP program ran from September 2008 till late 2010. So one of the first tasks that I had on coming on board was to put together a team of UFO-focused investigators as quickly as possible. So I was thinking back on this, and between November 2008 and probably April 2009, I personally conducted about 300 telephone interviews in an attempt to recruit different people for different positions at OSAP. And in addition, I did at least 100 face-to-face interviews in my office in that period of time. So we're talking about a pretty rapid clip in terms of bringing forth, you know, a lot of people into the office. Sometimes there were one or two people outside, but our focus was in hiring a team of PhD level scientists that would include physics and biology, master's level scientists, technicians. We also looked for database analysts and military intelligence personnel who had a long history investigative background. And of course, we also were looking for a lot of security officers because security was a big issue. Interestingly, one of our program managers was a 20-year veteran of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, also known as AFOSI. And, you know, this guy was a very, very seasoned investigator, and he helped us a lot in what, you know, turned out to be attempted formation of a relationship with AFOSI, which is discussed in the book. But all of these hiring and recruitment occurred within a 4 or 5 month period. I think by the end of May of 2009, we had a team of about 50 people. And George, when you consider that you know, this was a 24-month contract, so not only were we putting together the security infrastructure of this large organization, and that included facility security clearances, getting everything up to, you know, to a level that was sufficient for inspections, but hiring these people, training all of these different people, and then we executed multiple programs side by side, and all of this happened in a 24-month period. So we were on a pretty rapid clip, and I would say I've worked with government organizations in the past, NASA and DoD in other capacities, and putting that kind of level of activity together in a 24-month period, I think was pretty extraordinary. And obviously, Dr. Lacatski's input in Washington, D.C. and greasing the wheels to make all of this happen and putting together a pretty large organization that was focused only on UFO investigations. That was the key.
You know, one of the most disturbing aspects of the investigation that you both cooperated in and headed is highlighted in this book, the medical and physical consequences of close encounters, and not just lights in the sky and people maybe seeing structured craft, but also other related phenomena that resulted in documented physical effects, some of them pretty serious effects. Dr. Kelleher, can you tell us a little bit about what was learned about the medical consequences of these encounters and maybe provide an example?
Yes, we had multiple streams of cases pertaining to UFOs that were coming in. We were also examining multiple databases, some of which were pilot databases, military pilots, civilian pilots, and we were databasing a very large number of cases. We had what we called a data warehouse that housed 11 separate databases of UAP cases from around the world and from within the United States. And we actually databased several hundred cases where individuals both here and beyond the United States had encountered UFOs and had physiological effects, pathological effects, and medical effects, some of which medical effects were quite serious. And to that end, in terms of real-time investigations in medical UFO effects, we had 2 physician scientists, and I'm talking MD PhDs, that were consultants with OSAP. And their task was basically to be as a part of a team that would go out and investigate UAP related injuries. We had a few that were real-time. And normally during a UFO investigation, investigators may spend a few days with the witnesses, in terms of these medical type investigations, these investigations went on sometimes for months and sometimes for years. And a lot of these investigations involved taking of blood samples, analytical chemistry, hematology of blood samples, immune system parameters. Sometimes MRIs were done, all under the HIPAA standards. We were very careful to observe all patient confidentiality and HIPAA dictates. So we came across a few outstanding cases in terms of medical injuries. I can give you an example of one. There was a biotechnologist that was driving towards Oregon. He was driving towards Bend, Oregon, and he had his daughter in the car, and the daughter noticed off in the field 3 unusual unidentified objects that seemed to be erratically flying close to the ground. They were small. Right after they noticed that, she noticed this, they came towards the car, and the biotechnologist, as he was driving, 2 of these objects came into the vehicle. One passed right in front of father and daughter, right across the dashboard. The other went through his left shoulder and exited through his right shoulder. These were small, approximately baseball-sized objects. We still have not a good ascertainment of exactly what those objects were, but right afterwards, this guy began to feel dizzy. He began to feel nauseous. Following morning, he woke up. There was a lot of pain in his left side. His left face was very, very sunburnt. He started within a couple of days or a week losing hair on his left side. His left eye began to decrease in acuity. His left ear began to go downhill. Long story short, our physician scientists followed this guy and his family over several months. A few months later, this guy came down with a rare form of ductal carcinoma, and luckily was able to be treated. But the multiple blood samples were taken over that time, and sort of a very cohesive picture was put together so that a complete story of what we thought was a high probability of medical injury occurring as a result of this close encounter with unidentified flying objects. There are other cases that we explain in the book, but that one in particular was followed actually for years.
Just one last comment from each of you. We all have been working on it, you guys more than I have, for a couple of years putting this together. It's finally out. Dr. Lacatski, Jim, 14 months it took to get the stamp of approval from the DOD. I imagine you were kind of sweating it out there. Can you tell me about that process and how you feel about what emerged from that process?
Well, I'm glad that we finally got public release authority. And frankly, I understood all of their concerns, what we had to rewrite in the book and what we had to remove and put in. I wasn't really sweating it because I was almost in constant communication with them. Very pleasant people I was dealing with, and I understood their situation during the pandemic. They were working off site, but they had to process it through secure channels because you don't know what's in the book so they had to process it as if it had maybe top secret SCI information in it. Of course it didn't, but nevertheless, they had to handle it that way. They had to go into work, transfer to various organizations for their review and approval. But it eventually occurred, and I'm glad we got that approval for release.
Colm, you're excited it must be like giving birth, huh? To have this finally out, to be able to tell this story?
Yeah, I think it's been a long time coming, and I think the book, as it comes out, should be able to address a certain level of confusion that there especially in the media over the last 4 years, there has been a sort of a focus on the book will encapsulate the entire program, and I think it is a complete summary of the 2 year, the 24-month program that was that occurred. And as Jim said, over 100 reports during that 24 months were submitted to the Defense Intelligence Agency, both electronically and by paper. I remember standing in my office actually in Las Vegas with the paper copies in 3-ring binders, and that set of data actually went to about 6 feet high on the floor of my office. I mean, it was an incredible stash of data because it encompassed not only monthly reports, but also reports that were deep dives into specific cases and also topics. So I think it's about time that the entire story of OSAP is being told. And, you know, Dr. Lacatski was the driving force in Washington, D.C., and I was the day-to-day manager in Las Vegas. So I think between the two of us, we've come up with a pretty good summary of what the whole program looked like.
I think people will really enjoy seeing the genesis of tick investigation, how that was explained in the book. Also, what I liked was the inside baseball of how all of you, Senator Reid, Robert Bigelow, fought to get the program on and get it up and running, but also to defend it from predators in the Pentagon who eventually caused a lot of trouble. I mean, could imagine if OSAP and BASS had been allowed to continue, how far down the road we would be in understanding these mysteries, you know? Okay, well, first of many conversations to come. Looking forward to how the public reacts to the book, and I'll be talking to you guys soon.
Okay, thanks, George. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
A lot of times, there's not so